I'm Matt Downing, and welcome to Diving Deep EDU.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach. Yeah.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. This podcast is based in conversations that are willing to go off on a rabbit trail or two in order to find those aha moments. Those times when someone is able to say something in a way that brings increased clarity. Now, I'm an educator, so much of our conversations will have that as the end goal. How can the things that we are talking about help us to dive deeper into educational practices? Thanks for tuning in. Our guests are Stephen W. Anderson and Shaelynn Farnsworth. Stephen and Shaelynn are guiding the ship at Web 2.0 Classroom. Stephen directs the technology integration and Shaelynn spearheads literacy development. And they work together to provide effective training for a multitude of topics that go beyond technology and literacy. They are frequent contributors, speakers, presenters, and helpers of the educational community. Stephen, Shaelynn, thanks so much for joining. How are you both doing?
Thanks so much for having us.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having us join your podcast. We're pumped.
I'm pumped to have you. This is great to be able to have this conversation. And it's difficult to capture everything in an introduction. And I just want to give you a moment to share what you've been up to these days and give the listeners some better insight into your work. So, Stephen, why don't you start?
I've had some unique opportunities to talk to school leaders and school districts about what learning might look like in the fall. I spend a lot of time talking about school to home communications. And so how can schools better communicate with their parents and with their communities? So it's been quite busy, but it's good work. It's really trying to help school leaders understand, what distance learning or what remote learning or what emergency learning in this situation really means and how they can do it most effectively so that when students come back to the classroom face to face with a teacher, it can be a smooth transition.
Shaelynn, what about you?
Well, to kind of piggyback everything that Stephen just said, we have been busy not only working with groups of educators and districts, also some company promotions for transformation framework, supporting, synchronous, asynchronous learning, blended environments. But I've recently taken a new job, so I'm excited to share. I'm the new national director for the News Literacy Project. It's a nonprofit group that works with educators and also the public to help students hone skills in determining fact from fiction. And so Stephen is, of course, one of my largest supporters in this new endeavor. And, it just kind of blends all of the things that we've done together. But we focus a lot on not only literacy, but meaningful technology integration, leadership Stephen does a lot with. I do a lot with systemic change and implementation. So a variety of things. We're both veteran educators. I've been in 20 plus years. Stephen has almost 20 because he is younger than I am. Yep. And so we just do a variety of things.
I'm excited for you for the new job. Congratulations.
Thank
tell
you.
us a little bit more about what you'll be doing.
So I am working to advocate awareness and usage of Checkology. It's our online platform that has lessons on it currently. Everything from, helping kids determine bias to stuff for the election. We're creating one right now around conspiracy theories. And it basically just supports students in understanding relevant, reliable information, and so that they can be, informed consumers of content, but also active members of, civic lives in a democracy. So I'm extremely excited about it. It's all free. That's why I don't feel bad promoting it because, everyone needs that in their education, right? Especially in today's current climate. I know Stephen just did a webinar today about that. But yeah, so I'm excited. I'm going to be working with schools and districts and educators, kind of getting that word out and supporting them, in house. Virtually for the time being because of the pandemic,
Hmm.
helping hone those skills for students. So I'm pumped. It's something I'm passionate about. Have been talking about it for a very long time. Did it ignite? When was that, Stephen? 2 years ago? Three?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
2 years ago, did an
Mhm.
ignite at ISTE around, information literacy. So I'm just, excited about that endeavor.
Yeah, we'll have to link it in the show notes. So if you're listening, check this out. Check out the new work that will be going on. Before we do get too far into this conversation, it would be great to know how you two got connected within Web 2.0 Classroom. Maybe you could tell us the backstory a bit.
So, we have a friend, Beth Still, who lives in very rural Nebraska, and about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, she wanted to do a conference at her in for the teachers in her region that that pulled in, that brought in folks from other parts of the country to help the teachers understand technology and do something special for the teachers because it is very rural out there and it's not a place that you would typically see a conference like that. So Beth and I have been friends for a very long time, going back several years to early ISTE days, and so she asked me if I would fly across the country, drive from Denver to little tiny town Scottsbluff, Nebraska, to do this conference. And what I didn't know when I got there was that she had also invited Shaelynn, and Shaelynn and I had some connection through Twitter, and I had done a Twitter chat for her for some of her Iowa folks before, but it was the first time that we met face to face, and we heard each other speak, and we just kept in touch from there on, and got some ideas about, hey, you talk about this and I talk about this. It would be great if we put those things together. And we eventually started doing. We did some webinars together. We did some larger conferences together, and really found a really unique way that we can present with each other. That's really, it brings together both of our wide bodies of experience, but also our just fun nature that we have with each other to present together. And so from there, it's kind of grown into having many opportunities to do that all over the country together.
One thing that jumped out to me, in getting to know your work a little bit better and preparing for our conversation, was how both of your works do connect so nicely with the humanities and the technology, and coming together to provide such a richer development experience for teachers and other people that you're training. So, Stephen, you started Web 2.0 Classroom. What made you aware that, yes, I need to start this? This has to be done?
Yeah, at the time when I was doing that, I was in charge of a technology program for a very, very rural district in North Carolina, where I'm from. And there was, it might take me to go from one side of the district to the other 45 minutes around mountain, windy roads. And I'd been reading a lot about the use of social media tools, and especially blogging, to reach a wider audience. And so at the time, I created the blogging about the Web 2.0 connected classroom as a blog for the teachers in my district, as a way for me to be able to share things easily with them. I could put out a tweet, hey, here's a blog post, and so they could consume that without us having to constantly get together, or those were the days before even video conferencing was even popular in schools. And what I started to find was that I was putting it out on Twitter, but other people from outside the district were consuming it, and I was getting hits on my blog from all over. I was getting retweets from other places, and that was really when this notion of edu Twitter was really in its infancy, and it just kind of blossomed from there. And it really was when I co-created or created the hashtag EdChat that it really took off from there. And it's just been an opportunity for me and now Shaelynn and I together to share the things that we love, our passions about learning and helping educators discover who they are as a leader in their classroom, but also as a learner, but also for us to learn from everyone else as well.
I just want to point out, I think there's something, and thanks for sharing that story. I think there's something we can learn from that story, right? Something jumped out at me as you were sharing. It was a lot of the work started in your current community where you were at, right? There was a need in your district where you were working, so you created that blog, and it grew. And a lot of times, and I can be guilty of this as well, we want to create this huge change or this huge company or this huge industry or this huge movement. And a lot of times it starts where we're at. So for our listeners, it might be a blog, it may be something else, but it might be super helpful to start where you're at and see it grow forward. So thanks for sharing that. You guys have been doing, as you've already said, you've been doing a ton of work to help with remote learning since this shift has taken place. So I'm thinking about shaking things up a bit. We're going to role play. So I'm going to assign each of you a different group to give a pep talk to, so you can help provide some much needed renewed focus with this distance learning shift. Stephen, I'm going to have you go first. Okay. You're in a room. You're talking to some administrators. What would you say?
So the first thing I would say is I don't wish I would want to be these administrators at all. This time right now is so challenging. Seeing administrators grapple with trying to come up with different plans, but also trying to keep the health and safety of their students and their staff in mind has really put a lot of pressure on all of our administrators. One of my good friends is an elementary principal, and talking to her over the last couple of weeks, like, she's genuinely scared. And so I understand that. I have two children of my own, but what we have to remember is that this is not permanent. This is not something that, while it may feel like it's going to go on forever, it's not going to go on forever. We are going to come out of this on the other side stronger. And all of these things that we're doing, all of these plans that we're putting in place, and all of these considerations we're making for teaching students remotely, and the conversations that we're having about equity and access, and all of those things will lead to a positive change as long as we stick to it. There's a lot of backlash around, keeping kids at home, but ultimately we know that's where they're going to be safe, and we know that's where our staff is going to be safe. But it forces us to consider the problems, the systemic problems that we've had in education, like equity and like access and like standardized testing that is illogical and really serves no purpose for students or for teachers. All of these things that we wish we could change, now we have this golden opportunity as administrators to really reshape and revision what we want learning to be in our individual buildings and in our districts. And now is the time to seize that. It doesn't mean we have to dismiss all of the other things that we have to think about with health and safety and all of that, but we can use it and seize it as an opportunity to push forward.
Shaelynn, it's your turn. You're in a room with a bunch of teachers. What would you say?
All right. So I got this. Ready? I would give 4 main pieces of advice. I would remind them that relationships are key. So whether it is face to face or it is virtual, getting to know our students, taking time to build those relationships, not only between student and teacher, but student to student, is extremely important. Also, during this time, there's a lot of social emotional learning and needs that need to be met. And so those relationships are key to let us know how our students are doing. So number 1 is relationship. Number 2 is keep it simple. Don't feel like now is the time to dive into new technology products or have them clicking on all different types of link. Use your main LMS or whatever you're using to communicate with kids, and then add supplementals that make sense. So keep it simple. Number three is be consistent. It is important for kids to have a routine. Routines allow independence. They know what's coming next because of the routine, and it allows for innovation. So have those routines set in place, whether it is a certain time that you meet every day, or maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it may be consistent and have those routines established, especially if you are pivoting between, online or face to face or hybrid or synchronous, asynchronous. Keeping those routines and consistency is key. And the last thing is, don't forget to take care of yourself. We live in, a challenging time. As my kids' superintendent said here in my local community, this is probably the most challenging school year he has ever faced as a veteran superintendent. And I agree, because I know his backstory. This is a very challenging time. So you need to take time for yourself. You need to know when to disconnect. You don't have to be available 24/7. You need to make sure that you stay connected to not only your family, your friends, your colleagues, but also things that bring you joy. So those would be my top four. Relationships are key. Keep it simple, be consistent, and take care of yourself.
I want to piggyback off of some of the things you mentioned and zero in on instruction within remote learning. Okay. So thinking about that, like focusing in a bit. Teachers are becoming overwhelmed, right? And I think both of you can really be helpful in bringing some clarity to them in this overwhelming time. What do you think are some best methods that teachers should be utilizing when teaching virtually? Shaelynn, why don't you start it off?
For sure. And Stephen and I actually dug into this and have written about it and shared things on our Web 20 classroom. There's like some great infographics that your listeners can download and stuff about best practices and video and time and all of that sort of thing. So I think probably if you look at best practices for online, they are definitely different than the best practices during emergency or pandemic learning. Now, it is true that we've had some time during the summer to prepare, but again, that pivot from, my kids are starting face to face. Stevens are starting all online. So that pivot is going to be there for all of us in this coming school year. So best practices, again, I think consistency is key. Another thing is it's great to have asynchronous and synchronous opportunities. All new learning should be taped, so it gives kids access if they cannot attend for whatever reason, because of equity, because of access, because of things at home, maybe they're sick, whatever the case may be. But those things should be taped so that they can view and gain that learning when it's convenient for them. So that would be the first thing I would say. Now, Stephen, I know we dug into best practices in instructional videos. Do you remember some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest takeaway was that, you don't have to record or be online live for hours and hours and hours at a time
Mm-hmm.
for the learning to be effective. So, I think about my youngest, who is going into second grade. She is not the kind of kid who wants to sit and watch a video for an hour. She doesn't even want to talk to her teacher for an hour. She wants to be moving and doing. And so, when you in the younger grades, video like that should be used live and should be used to check in on students. In the middle grades, it's more, simple types of live instruction, perhaps maybe some recorded instruction, but no more than 10 to 15 minutes. Obviously, in the upper grades, as kids get older, they have longer attention. There may be more complex content that we're trying to cover, so a little bit longer. But the max time that we found through the research, and if you look at the most successful distance learning programs, they're going to say that most of the learning happens asynchronously, that they get together synchronously to talk about what they learn. They provide a lot of choice in what students are going to be, and a lot of choice in how students are going to be consuming that knowledge, and then a lot of opportunities for those students to work together with or without the teacher to digest that knowledge, to dig deeper with that knowledge. So it's not about spending hours and hours and hours on video and hours and hours and hours online. It's about providing high quality content in a meaningful way that students can easily consume.
Yeah, so I think, those instructional videos, like Steven said, streamline, I think 10 minutes, like 6 to 10 minutes is a sweet spot for recording any instructional videos. Students prefer to see their teacher, even if you are a mess that day and your hair is in a bun and you are having a busy morning and your kids are going crazy off the walls. They still prefer to see you rather than someone that they don't know off a YouTube video. So those things are specific to distance learning. Keep it short. Have a way that they can access it, curate it all in one spot, and make sure they see you. Know it's custom tailored for them. They don't want to watch a stranger on YouTube.
And I'll also piggyback off that too, in that, it's important that, when we went to this emergency learning last year, 2/3 of the school year was already completed. So students had been face to face with their teacher for a great deal of time, which allowed a lot of community building to happen, a lot of relationship building to happen. Now what we're doing is starting a school year where the vast majority of students are going into a new situation, new teacher, new classmates. And so by simply taking the easy way out and just finding a bunch of YouTube videos that have that aren't the teacher, it doesn't do anything to help build those relationships. And so the kids need to have those opportunities to interact with their teacher, especially now more than ever, because they're starting out remotely. We need to foster those relationships very early on, and that's ultimately going to make the transition back to the classroom that much easier.
Yeah, I found your infographic super helpful, right? Giving direction for the live instruction and then the recorded lessons. I think everyone needs, I know you've already said this, but do not make a video longer than 10 minutes. I've seen people make like 50-minute videos and that's nuts. Okay. I don't mean to make anyone feel bad that's listening.
The way that I talk about it is, would you want to have your principal send you a 50-minute staff meeting that he made you or she made you sit there and watch? No, you don't want to do that. So put yourself in the seat of the student. They don't want to sit there for 50 minutes and hear you drone on. 10 minutes, make it action packed. And again, you're not Steven Spielberg. It's not high production. You can do something very easily in that amount of time.
Shaelynn, I want to ask you a question about literacy and the humanities in response to remote learning. Many teachers, well-intentioned, are assigning their students, read, but we can do better. We can do better to engage in literacy activities while we are remote. What can teachers do to engage in better literacy activities?
Well, a couple of things, and I'm gonna talk to all of the parents in your audience as well, because I have just read some research, and I think it was Tim Shanahan who just put this out. But what can parents do? Because everybody is worried, especially for those younger grades, those emerging readers, and they have no literacy background. The number one thing that you can do is have your kids build up stamina in reading. And so having them read 30 minutes independently each day. But also on top of that, you need to have a conversation with them about what they read. And so parents looking to support kids in literacy, have them read consistently 30 minutes and build up that stamina. If they start with 10, you can build it up to 30, and have a conversation about what they're reading. And then finally write about what they're reading. Now, this does not have to be back to back. This could be you read for a chunk of time, you go out, do your other activities. Maybe it's crafting, maybe it's physical activity, and then you talk about it later and you write about it later. But those types of consistency will help build stronger readers. It does much better to make sure it's consistent rather than saying, oh, we're going to read for 2 hours at the end of the week. No, try to get 30 minutes of reading each day in there if you're a parent. Now, if you are a literacy instructor, there are lots of different things that you can do. The first is you want to motivate students. And I'm talking for the upper grades here. There's a shift in motivation that happens around fifth grade in literacy learning. And when fifth graders on up, they're motivated by things they're interested in and how does this affect my future. And so when you keep that in mind and you give them free choice to read what they want to, um, that increase motivation for reading. Now, you can have freedom within the rails, as Stephen and I talk about, or the big arrow theory. And so, if you have a student who continuously chooses graphic novels, it's okay once in a while to say, "Why don't you choose something from a different genre? Make a genre board or whatnot." But on top of that, small group instruction. Elementary educators do a great job, especially in the area of literacy, assessing their students at the very beginning, knowing what they have mastered, what they're on the cusp of learning, and what they need to focus on. Same thing true will be for our middle school and high school teachers, especially if we're in this distance learning. So then my next suggestion is to small group them. Maybe your schedule, like my son's high school schedule, is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday is small group support, MTSS, all of those types of things. Then you pull those students in for support for that small group learning. So figure out what they are on the cusp of learning and small group. Know explicitly and clarify, as Hattie says, what your learning and teaching objective is, and give kids choice, because I'll tell you, kids will resist reading and writing if it's not something they care about.
Shaelynn, you've mentioned in some of your work a pandemic journal, and that seemed really engaging to me. Can you tell our listeners what that is?
Yeah, for sure. I was talking with Stephen about this, and he said you should write about this. If you look at throughout history, all major historical events, some of the most compelling information about the time has been shared by women, actually, and through journals. So think of the most famous one most of us have read, Anne Frank's journal. And so there's lots of different examples throughout history when there are these major events and how information is gained about the daily lives of children, of people, of what's going on through journals. And so we were talking about that, and I love journaling. I'm a big fan of journaling, not only to use as inspiration for further writing. I don't feel like everything you write you have to take to a publishable state, nor do you have to grade it. But I do think it is important for people to write. And now is a time that's extremely important to capture what's going on. You are, capturing a piece of history. And so if you look at that blog post, and I'm sure you'll get in there, that's a picture of my daughter. And it was inspired by a photographer. And if you go in there, I give the link to the photographer. And his original piece was about what kids eat around the world. And so he has them surrounded by food. Well, what I've seen and what I write about in that blog post is surround the kids about what's important to them visually in an image during this pandemic. So you'll see my daughter has her instrument, she has her craft stuff, she has a book, she has her phone, of course. And that small thing can become an entry. Creating lists. Lists are great ways to add entries into a journal about what the heck's missing. If we think back to the very beginning, and Stephen and I were talking about this earlier in March. I mean, Stephen, what things were missing on the shelves of stores when we think back?
Oh gosh, I mean, and stuff that's still, hard to come by. I mean, you and I were just talking about like disinfectant wipes today.
Mm.
Obviously people ran out to go get all kinds of paper products and things like that. But I mean, it just goes to show you that's why I love that pandemic journal, is that,
Hmm.
for kids, it's going to be easy to forget this time. Even my own daughters, once it's out of sight, out of mind, and it's just because they're inundated with so much information every day that that the memories they'll fade. And so having that journal to look back upon about the own individual personal experiences that they had once, when Shaelynn suggests, when she had her daughter doing it, I have my kids doing it too, based on that suggestion, because, when they grow older, they're, 20 years from now, even 10 years from now, even 5 years from now, who knows, that they might find this thing and look back and be like, it was really like that, and jar those memories. And, we see that a lot with these different types of projects to try and capture stories before, voices are lost, with, World War II veterans, or living history project. I wrote about, doing living histories. Now is a great time to do a living history project with students. It teaches them not only a lot about themselves, but about their family or their their neighbors or their communities, but there are also literacy skills that are built in there, interviewing skills and things like that. So this is a great opportunity to do that, because now we have technology at our advantage, right? So we don't need, we can do all of this work even physically distanced from each other using technology.
That's a great example, and thanks for sharing that now, and also thanks for writing a blog post about it so that people can check it out in greater depth. I think this has been super helpful with remote learning. You guys have sort of casted a big vision, but then you've also given some specifics that we all do need, that we can sort of grasp onto and try to figure things out. But I do want to dive a bit deeper. I want to think about the future of our classrooms. And by the future, I mean beyond this coming September, October, November, beyond next September, October, November, maybe a couple September, October, November's away. I would really like to hear from the both of you. What do you envision or hope for the future of education? Stephen, you want to start?
I'm going to actually start, Matthew. I'm going to start this one. Yep.
Of course.
Because that's right. I'm going to lead this one, because then I know Stephen will bring it up with a perfect example. But if you look at change theory and you look at the research in education, there is this interesting concept theory called apprenticeship by observation by Dan Lordy. And I know Stephen has heard me talk about this, and so he's probably chuckling in the back. I don't know if it's new to you, Matt, but it basically says that without sustained support, you revert to back what is comfortable. So right now, when we talk about this future vision, we talk about how we could reimagine education, we talk about blended learning, we talk about meaningful technology integration. The thing to remember, without sustained support to those educators, they will revert back to what is comfortable and how they were actually taught. So let me give you an example. I had a brand new principal. He had a brand new building because there was a flood, so they had to rebuild the whole building. And he said, let's bust up education and let's create a whole new system. And so he put teachers in wings according to grades. And he said, you can do this however you want to. You can co-teach. You can have lectures, on different days. You don't have to meet every period. You can do PBL. You can do design thinking. And what he found after 1 week was they reverted back to 45-minute class period. And it's truly because of that apprenticeship of observation. And what sort of systemic change and what change theory do we have supporting our educators? So although we have great ideas, and although I'm sure Stephen will tell you fantastic ones, and I have some hopes and dreams of my own, it's important to remember that you need that, high quality professional learning and sustained support to actually change behavior. Stephen?
Yeah, I completely agree. And as we think about what learning is going to look like, perhaps post COVID, it's timely. Shaelynn and I were on a panel this week where we talked about just this thing, and what we kept coming back to was exactly what Shaelynn said, is that high quality professional learning is ultimately what's going to change and drive instruction to be better. And I see it now with the proliferation of ed tech tools, about how many ed tech tools there are and how many to choose from. And even Shaelynn said it herself, like, just don't go clicking on things and introducing things. Now is not the time to do that. But I see a lot of things that are introduced that are of little value to the actual learning process, either because the tool itself doesn't provide any value, or the teacher doesn't know how to implement it through high quality research backed instruction. And if we focus our attention more, and what I hope is we focus our attention more on what research actually tells us what works, because that research does exist. If anybody's familiar with the work of John Hattie in visible learning, there's a wide bodies of research that shows, these are the things that work and these are the things that probably don't work. So let's focus on the ones that do. And, and technology can certainly supplement and support those things. But, thinking about the future and what it's going to look like, I hope that we shift our thinking around what and where learning actually takes place. I love the story that she just told about those students and and it's a rethinking and redesigning and having that opportunity. I mean, we have that now, just as we talked about before. We have this opportunity to re-envision what we want to do. People talk, educators talk all the time about, I don't have time to do PBL. I don't have time to do design thinking. I don't have time. Now we have an opportunity where we have completely blown the system up and really can drive and change what we want to do. You can do design thinking and PBL through distance, through remote learning. It's totally possible. And so if we do it now and we begin and we ease our way into it, that transition back to the classroom becomes that much easier. But let's not just rest on our laurels and say, well, this is just a temporary situation. And when students come back, things are going to think we can just go back to normal where it was nice and comfortable. Schools are often places that are comfortable for adults rather than the children they serve. And so we need to really seriously consider, what does the classroom look like? What does the learning look like? What type of research are we introducing? What type of professional development is going to support that? And now is the perfect opportunity to do that.
And to piggyback on what Stephen was saying, as you can tell, we're huge advocates of PBL, design thinking, inquiry-based thinking. Community-based learning is large here in Iowa. We have a lot of students in schools that are Iowa big, that are connected, to those different schools. So it's widely popular. It is possible. There are fantastic examples to learn from. And that's funny that, Iowa big. Those are some of my favorites.
I'm a big fan.
Yes, yes. But now, like Stephen said, is a time that we can explore those things, but we also have to make sure, that they are followed through, that teachers in their learning is continued to be placed priority, and also that kids understand why they're doing what they're doing. So I think probably as a young teacher, the largest wake-up call for me is when I had a fantastic unit and I asked them, why do you think we did this? Or why did we read this? And they say, because it's on the test. Then it kind of tugs at your heart. So understanding, what you're doing, the purpose behind it, but also clarifying it and making sure it's crystal clear, not only to you and your colleagues, but also to students, so they can understand that transfer effect, that deep learning.
You guys have both mentioned the importance of high quality professional learning. What does that look like? What does high quality professional learning look like? What are some features so we know, yes, I'm doing high quality professional learning, or no, I'm actually not?
I think it goes back to, a lot of the PD that educators undertake is driven by some sort of some external need that the district has, rather than looking at the needs of the individual educator. And so, people and even me on this podcast have dogged standardized testing. But there is an opportunity to utilize standardized testing to drive needs for professional learning if they were used in that way. So, I was a science teacher. If my kids took the science test at the end of the year, and I saw that my students really struggled with things around, concepts around biology, then if I knew that, then I could then go find PD that would help me be better in that. But even beyond that, it really comes down to letting teachers drive what they based on their need and based on their what it is that they need to grow. But the way that's designed is it's rooted in research, and it's what we talk about is pedagogy, and a lot of professional development is rooted in pedagogy, which is what we do in the classroom. What it needs to be rooted in is andragogy, which is adult learning. And what adult learning theory tells us is that we have to honor what adults come to us with, what they already know, but we also have to give them opportunity and time to try and come back and reflect. And so a lot of PD is this, hey, come in this session 1 hour and then go out and do this, and I'm going to evaluate on it as an administrator, and you better get it right the first time. And that's not really the way that adult learning theory works. But the pedagogy that we learn through andragogy needs to be it needs to be research backed. It needs to be looking at what does work. And now keep in mind, there's research around that tells us what does work, but really it needs to be through the lens of what works with our students, where one population of students may really respond to direct instruction teaching methods, which are research proven to work very well, but direct instruction gets dogged all the time. For another group of students, direct instruction may not be the most appropriate. And so we talk a lot about formative assessment, and while formative assessment is often positioned to understand where students are in their learning, we need to reposition it to better understand where we are in our teaching. If we combine the research-backed instruction and being students of our students, or being diagnosticians of our students, then we can go seek out and know, okay, professional development that's high quality, that's going to meet my needs, is that is backed in research, that gives me an opportunity to try, that is sustainable and is long term, and isn't kind of one of these, let's bring in this speaker and have them speak and tell us everything is wonderful, and then that speaker leaves to go collect a check to go to the next place. It's this long-term, sustainable, backed in research type of learning that is really difficult for schools to provide, because just like it is in the classroom, we need to be doing differentiation. And to do that, that takes time.
Yeah. And something that, along with what exactly Stephen just said, throughout our careers, we've been blessed with the opportunities to learn and have some great training. And so, I feel like I am, an expert in something called CBAM, and Stephen is definitely knowledgeable in that and, building his expertise. But I've had training in something called CBAM, which is the science behind implementation and change. And so, how do you sustain change? Because that's the trick. Change is hard. Sustaining it is even more difficult. And so, if you look at implementation science according to education, there's a set of tools that you can use, and I really like the CBAM tools, and that's what Stephen and I use when we work with districts for sustaining that change. But it starts with clarifying what ideal implementation is, having a reflective tool in the form of IC maps for all users of that initiative, and then setting goals and having that continuous professional development model. It definitely is, a 3 to 5 year process. But if you don't have the types of tools needed to measure implementation, you'll just be spinning your wheels. And so we both really like those tools from CBAM and use those quite frequently when we work with districts.
Stephen, Shaelynn, this has been a blast having this conversation, and it's been super helpful. You guys have taken us into the particulars as far as, okay, do a video for this long. And then we've sort of zoomed out and we've talked about change theory. And I think combining those two is so helpful. Having the practical, right? But then having the bigger picture as far as how can we bring about transformation within our school and how can it last? So we're getting to the end. But before we do, who do each of you want to give a shout out to?
Once again, I was going to let you go first, but I'll go.
There you go.
I'm trying to be polite. So I would give a shout out to both my daughters, because Reaghan and Chesney. Actually, my youngest Chesney has a birthday coming up here in 2 days. So they always like to say that Daddy is internet famous, because they can hear him on their iPhone and can see videos. But those two are the most wonderful people to me. So my shout out would be to my daughters, Reaghan and Chesney.
Great.
Aw. Of course, I want to give a shout out to my children as well. So Aiden and Grace, but also, Stephen and I want to give a shout out to all educators returning back in the fall. It is a huge undertaking. It is probably one of the most challenging years that we have all started, especially those first year teachers. And along with that, we have a lot of focus on the table. So not only do we have a pandemic, but a lot of emphasis has been placed in social emotional learnings, anti-racist and Black Lives Matter, literacy. So there are a lot of great educators doing so many phenomenal things that, Stephen and I are in awe, and we just really want to give a shout out to everybody doing the work right now and, doing what's best for kids.
It is time for the final word. What would each of you like to say to close out this podcast?
So I'll end it with the three things that I leave every session with. One, make sure that you take time to reflect on your learning. So whether it's this learning here, maybe Shaelynn obviously says amazing, wonderful things like about literacy. Take time to reflect about those things and their impact and what that could mean for you. 2, make sure that you take time to push the boundaries of your learning. So maybe even if it's here or, you see a tweet or you read a blog post and something piques your interest, expand and broaden your horizons. The world isn't just one type of ed tech tool or one type of platform. There's lots of learning and lots of things that are happening everywhere and lots of brilliant people whose voices need to be amplified. So expand the boundaries of your learning. And then the last one is to make sure that you share your learning. Somehow, some way, make sure you share with folks who you are not immediately connected to. So, whether it's sending tweets or writing your own blogs or, calling up and sending out a link to your own personal Zoom room so that you can do some professional development for the teachers in your school. Learning is inherently personal, but it's also very social as well. The things that we learn can be good, but if we want to make them great, we need to share them.
It's fantastic. I always love those 3 things that he ends all of our sessions and all of our engagements with. Probably what I want to end the podcast is with 2 things. First, of course, I do want to give a shout out because I'm so passionate about misinformation, disinformation. It is spreading at a rapid rate in our digital age, and just so be conscious of that because it's easy not only to get sucked down the rabbit hole, but also to be physically and mentally upset about things that you read. And so keep that lens on. But also it is, Matt, it is the golden age of podcasts. And so we definitely want to give a shout out to Diving Deep EDU and tell all your listeners, make sure you like and subscribe to this podcast because it is the golden age of podcasting. And Stephen and I talk about this actually at different conferences and yeah, this is a great one.
Stephen, Shaelynn, what a pleasure. Thank you for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. I appreciate your time, sharing your experiences, and helping us think deeper about these important issues. To those listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Diving Deep EDU. Like Shaelynn said, if you like this episode, subscribe, share it out, post a review on Apple Podcasts. All of those things will help get this podcast out to more people. Until next time.
Wow, it's time to reflect. That's astounding. You've been checking out the podcast from Matthew Downing. Hope you like diving deep like a scuba diver. And the show provoked hope, that's our true desire.